uh, regional security. Okay. We're joined by two leading experts. We have Ambassador Elliott Abrams. He's the Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations here in Washington, D.C. He served as a Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy National Security Advisor in the administration of President George W. Bush, where he supervised U.S. policy in the Middle East for the White House. And he also served as a special representative for Iran and Venezuela in the administration of President Donald Trump, and obviously one of the leading Mideast experts here in Washington. We are also joined by Gabe Noronha. He is a JINSA Fellow at our Gamunder Center for Defense and Strategy. He also served as Special Advisor for the Iran Action Group at the U.S. State Department, where he coordinated policy and directed the State Department's communications and congressional affairs on Iran. He also served as a staff person, as a special assistant on the Senate Armed Services Committee. By the way, I forgot to mention actually Elliott's most important positions. He's also a member of JINSA's Iran task force and was heavily involved in and was a member of our group that we did on the day after on Gaza in a project that he coached, that my colleague John Hanna chaired, and that they put out a report earlier this year, which I think is still extremely relevant. So I'm going to turn to you, Elliott. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in what has happened. Let me start with a simple question, and then we're going to talk about Israel, what this means about Israel, the war, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and so on. But let's just start with the simple question. How did things change in the last couple of days, do you think, since the election?
Sorry, Mike.
Okay.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
How did they change? Let's look at the foreign and the domestic side. On the domestic side, they changed in that the victory was broader, larger than anybody seems to have predicted. So I think for people in the Middle East, and for that matter, anywhere else around the world, they're trying to understand, as I think the Democratic Party is in the United States, how did that happen? What does that mean? What are the foreign policy implications of these new alignments of voters? What do those voters want? What do Trump voters want? And that's something, we've begun to see that discussion, particularly among Democrats. That's going to go on for a very long time. On the international front itself, people now have to make different calculations about what U.S. policy will be. The policy that, everybody that I knew thought that a Harris administration would essentially continue Biden policy. So you make a calculation based on that. Now it won't be continued. Now you will have a policy that is a lot closer to President Trump's policy in his first term, maybe not identical. He may have changed his mind about some things, and the world has changed. But look at what happened today. There are news stories that the government of Qatar has told top Hamas officials, get out, pack your bags. Well, why now? It's impossible to believe that that's not a reaction to the Trump victory. Surely the Israelis, as they try to think about what do we want to do in Gaza between now and January 20th or next year? What do we want to do about Hezbollah between now and January 20th and then next year? Does it change Iran's calculations right now about the promised strike on Israel and calculations about Israel will do back? I would just end this by saying Joe Biden is president for another 9 weeks. Things can happen in those 9 weeks. Just to take one example, it was in this transition period in 2016 that the Obama administration allowed the passage of probably the most anti-Israel resolution we ever got in the Security Council. So this period, the Biden administration period of office, of power, is not over. And we've got to factor that in as well.
All right, let me follow up with you, Elliott, before I get to Gabe. All right, let's start getting into some of these issues. Let's talk about, and there are a lot to deal with, obviously, but let's start about, you mentioned, you already made reference to it, Hezbollah and Hamas and so on. And we'll get to Iran, but the president-elect already said, I don't start wars. It's clear he doesn't want. And there's reports that he has told the Israelis, do whatever you need to do, but let's get this kind of stuff done. You get done what you need to by January 20th. How do you see a difference with him, one, being elected during this 9-week period, and then, not everything may end by then, but how he'll approach things differently? So one is, how do you look at the Israeli calculus for the next 9 weeks on the war?
Well, we start with start where you are.
Yeah.
That is, this what's purported to be a quotation, do what you have to need to do, get it over with. Why was the president elected? Why was President Trump elected? The economy mostly.
Yeah.
And he said in his short remarks, his short acceptance speech, what he wants is to provide safety and security and prosperity and economic growth for the people, for all Americans, and for the people who voted for him. In that calculation, foreign wars involving American troops does not appear. That is not what he wants. And he has many times proudly said that it didn't happen on his watch. It didn't happen when he was president. So I think the thing he wants to avoid conflict whenever it's possible. He's not a pacifist. And what he wants to avoid above all is having, the endless wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, with hundreds of thousands of American troops fighting and dying overseas. The Soleimani incident reminds us that he's willing to use force. My own view is that he's willing to use force very strongly, but not in a way that is going to create one of those endless wars that he is so very much against. So what I think you will see is less pressure on the Israelis in Lebanon or in Gaza, because maybe there are deals and maybe the combat ends. But if it doesn't end, I think there'll be less pressure of the sort we've seen in the Biden administration. Certainly no threats to withhold arms that Israel needs. And, you can read in the paper many people saying that, in fact, there has been a slowdown in some of the pipelines. That will not happen in a Trump administration.
You think, though, one thing that he also, Elliott, cares about is winning, right? And isn't that important to him, that he likes to see his allies win too, it seems like? And one of the things we've seen, of course, with the Biden administration, not just how they've dealt with Israel, but also we've seen this a bit with Ukraine, is, a hesitancy. You've seen it with their own policy, right?
Yeah.
And one thing he'd like to see Israel win, and that look, however, that's
Yes.
the
Yes.
Yeah.
He does like to see winners on our side.
Yeah.
And the opposite is either defeat or endless conflict. And he will have been, anybody has to have been extremely impressed with what Israel has been able to do with respect to Iran and Hezbollah in an amazingly short time. So I think it's a different attitude. It is impossible for me to imagine President Trump saying to Prime Minister Netanyahu, whatever, 8 months ago or something, take the win. That's not Donald Trump.
Yeah. Gabe, let me ask you, do you have, and I want to just focus just on Israel before we get to the Iran issue, but obviously they're connected. Do you have any thing to add about what Elliott said about how Trump might deal differently with Israel and the war?
Well, if you look at President Trump, one of the great things about his Middle East policy is that he's really clearly articulated his views and his vision for the Middle East extensively in speeches, in essays. I think really starting with the Riyadh speech that he gave in 2017, where he laid out a vision calling for each of those Arab nations to live in peace with each other, and most importantly, drive out extremists. And driving out extremists wherever they are domestically, and noting that they're same people killing Muslims are the same people killing Jews. And so I think this very strong aversion to any governments that are aiding or abetting Hamas, aiding or abetting Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, and really the head of the snake, Iran, are all going to be targets of his. He has no tolerance for those radical ideologies. And so the second big pillar is, of course, the Abraham Accords, where he was very proud, and rightly so, of the incredible progress that he made. 5 peace deals in 4 months. Everyone forgets about the Kosovo normalization, in addition to Morocco, UAE, Bahrain. And so I think this is going to be a big focus of his, is bringing peace, not just in the current ongoing conflicts, but then expanding that broader out. I think in terms of what does Trump see as victory, that is victory to him, is bringing peace deals. You saw this was a major component of his campaign messaging, whether that was Ukraine, Russia, or Gaza, Hezbollah. He said the American public are tired of wars. I think to follow up on Elliott's point, if there's one way I could phrase it, is he hates entanglement, but is a big proponent of engagement. And I think that differentiation between engagement and entanglement is really important. And that's how I think he's going to be striking a proper balance here, in alignment with where the American public really is on how involved we should be, and averting sort of the worst possibilities.
So I want to wait on getting to, I appreciate you raising that, Gabe, and that's very important. And I want to get to the issue of peace deals. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit more about conflict. Let's talk about Elliott. I guess you referenced it already. There've been reports that the Iranians were going to hit. We're going to. So everybody, I just remember that the Iranians fired ballistic missiles at Israel in April. Then Israel made some sort of retaliation. Then there was one on October 1st that was like about 200 ballistic missiles, and then Israel retaliated and seemed to particularly knock out Iranian air defense capabilities, among some other things. But so that if the Iranians hit again Israel, that it would be it looked like an easier way for the Israelis to go in and actually do more serious damage on the different elements, sectors in Iran, and including possibly the nuclear. So then there were reports that the Iranians were going to do something this week, and then they wanted to wait till the election. You had the supreme leader making very strong comments, and now we don't really know where it is and if that's gone. And I wonder how you think the Iranians, and recognizing, is a long question, I'm sorry, that recognizing that, as my colleague Yaakov Amidjor, General Amidjor, has pointed out, I think we've learned that we don't really understand the Iranians based on how they behave sometimes this year. How do you see on this immediate issue of what the Iranians may or may not do? How do you think they're looking at this?
It does not seem logical to me for them at this point to do some kind of very big strike on Israel that is meant to do real damage and take lives, because we know that Israel will hit back. And we know now, after the election, that the Israelis will feel a little less constrained by what the Biden administration wants, and are more likely to hit back a bit harder. We also know, as you just said, that the air defenses are basically insignificant at this point, so that a lot of damage could be done to economic targets, military targets, nuclear targets, or political targets. So to me, it in a sense, it doesn't make sense for Iran to try to do grave damage in Israel. nor do I think they have to do it from a public opinion point of view in Iran. Iranians don't want war either. So why then do it? Two reasons, maybe, because they said they would, because the supreme leader is, in a sense, compromised on this position. Secondly, there does seem to be a growing power on the part of a newer generation in the Revolutionary Guards. And that is a constituency of concern to the supreme leader, and no doubt to the president, Pezeshkian, because they're going to be there when the supreme leader is gone, which, by the way, we should note, may well happen while Donald Trump is president. So maybe the supreme leader feels constrained by his own hotheads, but I think it's very hard to see any significant Iranian strike that's not going to result in very great damage to Iran on the part of Israel.
Can I, if I may very briefly add perhaps one idea, which is that Iran is desperate to try to teach both the US and Israeli systems the wrong lessons, that they want, that our strategic thinkers do not believe that we can escalate to de-escalate. They do not want us to believe that we have escalation dominance, and that they are going to do foolish things to stave off the idea that they are a paper tiger. They're going to continue to try to assassinate President Trump and his close officials. They're going to continue thinking about this attack on Israel, not because they're in any position of strategic strength, but because they do not want to be perceived as being in a position of supplication and weakness. Now, that's a very dangerous position to go long term.
Yeah. On that, Gabe, let me ask you, and then I'll jump back there. You know, the Iranians apparently were involved in, or there were Iranians involved, some Iranian involvement, it seems like, to assassinate Trump. Of course, they've tried to, we all know that they've threatened other former senior Trump officials who they perceive as involved in the killing of Soleimani, General Soleimani, in January of 2020. Anyway, how do you think, Gabe? You think Trump, President-elect Trump, takes that kind of threats personally?
I think any man is going to take a threat against his life for 4 years pretty seriously. When I think of governments that have mismanaged the incoming transition, I have Germany fairly highly on my list, but really topping the charts is the Islamic Republic. Again, this was something contemplated, which is an act of war, killing a former president, or killing a now perhaps president-elect if they're still attempting to do this. The last time I can recall that such a plot was orchestrated was Saddam Hussein trying to bomb George H.W. Bush in 1994. To his great credit, President Bill Clinton sent I think 28 or 32 Tomahawks to the Iraqi Ministry of Intelligence in retribution for the mere act of plotting something like that. It's been very unfortunate that this administration hasn't acted more forcefully to try to disrupt these plots. It's important. It's not just President Trump. It's his former Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, CENTCOM Commander, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his former special representative for Ron Elliott's predecessor, Brian Hook. That is going to have an effect on President Trump. Yeah. One thing that we have seen that's been consistent from President Trump is his statement, "I am not looking for regime change." He's always been consistent that he believes the future of Iran is up to the Iranian people. But I have to say the Iranians are really poking the bear on this one. And I'll hazard a guess and say that President Trump won't permit that status quo that we've had the last 4 years to last much longer into administration once he takes office.
Yeah. My colleague Blaise Mishtel and I wrote an op-ed a little while ago after these reports of the Iranian plot on Trump came out, and we encouraged the Biden administration to hit back hard. And we referenced, of course, Clinton's attack, which wasn't really that vigorous, but at least it was something. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they've taken our advice. Let me ask you, so that's a good segue, though. Elliott is look, Gabe already, I think, referenced Hook, and there's been reports that the administration will at least revert back to what they call the maximum pressure campaign. How do you see
Yeah.
the new administration approaching Iran? Will it be like the last time, or?
Well, I think it'll be a lot like the last time. Let me step back for a second and say it was not President Trump's policy to go to war with Iran. The policy was to maximum pressure and more pressure and more pressure, and in the end, force them to recognize the balance of power here and to agree to negotiate not what he thought was a bad deal, the JCPOA, that was really poorly negotiated by the United States, and said nothing about missiles and said nothing about the support for terrorism and all the regional proxies, but rather a real agreement that would cover all of that. And to get that out of the Iranians, it was obvious that they were going to need to feel a great deal of hurt, and they did. I mean, if you go back to 2020, the president's last year in office, oil exports were down to 250,000 barrels a day at one point. They're 6 times that now. Foreign currency reserves, unfrozen, real, reachable reserves, were at one point, I think, $4 billion, and they're well over 50 now. You can look at the Energy Administration's own data on the tens of billions of dollars more per year that Iran has made while Joe Biden has been president. Well, I believe President Trump will try to stop that. You can't do that overnight. You're trying to reduce Iranian oil exports by about 1 million barrels a day. I think that merely coming to office and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to enforce these sanctions, will knock off about half of it. Because I think there are a lot of people, boat captains, boat owners, port operators, insurers, crews, that are willing to participate, frankly, when Joe Biden is president and not enforcing the sanctions, and they'll step back. The other 500,000, I think, is going to take a lot longer and be more difficult because it's going to China. 90% of exports, Iranian oil exports, are not going to China. But they don't all go, none of them go in, PLA Navy ships. They go in ships that many different people own, operate, pilot, insure, through ports that can be sanctioned as well. One other point on this. The question is not so much the global price of oil, but the price that Iran gets. Iran sells at a discount now. I haven't checked this, but I'm willing to bet a lot of money that discount has already increased the day that Donald Trump won the presidency, and it'll increase more in January. So that also reduces Iran's income. Their need to sell at a greater discount because those buying it are taking a greater risk. So I think you will absolutely see the maximum pressure campaign return.
Yeah. And I would think, and I haven't looked at the numbers yet, but I would think the Saudis are going to gain financially from this, because someone's got to make up for that those reduced exports. What do you think, Gabe? Out of the gate, the administration might do on Iran? I mean, you think what Elliott, anything additional what Elliott said? Yeah.
The Iranian rial hit an all-time low, probably right around the time that Pennsylvania was called. And that's not a coincidence. It's expectation setting. And again, a lot of the work is going to be done before January 20th, only one president at a time, but that expectation will have a great effect. I think you're going to see a couple things. One is a very aggressive, proactive approach, which says any individual, any entity, even any family member of those individuals who's involved, they are liable to sanction. This is something that Congress has now actually mandated on a bipartisan basis. that they've said the administration needs to do. So in this case, it's not Trump administration acting unilaterally, but it's really acting in concert with Congress and increasingly in concert with our international partners. What we hear from the Europeans is a much greater willingness now to get involved. They've had 4 years of the approach where they got to try the diplomatic option, and they got to try asking, begging even for a deal. They weren't able to get anywhere. And they're quite frustrated with the progress of Iran's nuclear program. The French in particular are very concerned with Iran's ballistic missiles. And so I think one of the big differences that we're going to see between the first and second Trump administration is a larger international coalition from Europe. One of the challenges is going to be getting some of the regional partners to be more involved. One of the things the Biden administration pushed was they wanted normalization between Iran and its regional neighbors in the hopes that that would stabilize the situation. In reality, what that did is it just allowed Iran to focus more of its attention on attacking Israel and undermining U.S. positions in the world. So I think what we'll see is a return to that diplomatic isolation of asking countries, maybe it's not shutting down embassies, but we don't want business as usual with the Iranian regime. If they are going to act as a rogue state, sending suicide drones to Russia, then Europe needs to punish them in kind. If they're going to continue fomenting terror with the Houthis, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with Iraqi militia, the ask is going to be to our Arab partners, there needs to be consequences to that as well.
Here
and then I think, yes, go ahead, Elliott.
I was just going to say, following up on Gabe, it's worth mentioning snapback, which the UN determined that the United States could no longer do, but the EU3 can do. Actually, England's not in the EU now, so the E3 will say. I would expect that there would be early discussions between the Trump State Department and those three governments, UK, France, Germany, on their invocation of snapback before it expires in October of 2025. I'd also expect some Trump action with respect to the Houthis. We've all read in the newspaper that leaked message by General Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, saying that American sailors were going to die sooner or later with these continued attacks on American Navy ships by so-called Houthi missiles, which are Iranian missiles. The Houthis don't build these missiles. We had a similar situation in the Trump administration in 2020 when there was a real uptick in Iraq and Syria in the attacks on Americans. And the administration basically told the Iranians, if an American soldier dies, you're going to get hit, not some proxy in the west of Iraq, you. And there was a 90% immediate 90% reduction in the number of those attacks. That is the kind of thing I think that a new administration will tell Iran. If one of these Houthi missiles hits an American Navy ship and kills American sailors, you will be sorry you provided that missile.
Do you think, by the way, my understanding, I'm sure it's yours, Elliott, is that General Kurilla has wanted to hit back a lot harder, and the White House has restrained him.
Correct. And the Navy has wanted to hit back harder.
Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, that's been one of their founding objectives, is to make sure the sea lanes are open. But it must be very frustrating for a military commander to see his forces get hit so often and not to be able to do more. Let me ask you on Elliott, it's not exactly about the Houthis, that the Iranians have probably less sway on this situation. But one of the things is obviously the U.S., the hostages left in Gaza, including some Americans. Now, you were in the Reagan administration, I think when you were in high school, I guess it was, you were serving as an official. And but the Iranians held Americans hostage and they were released, I think, the day of Reagan's inauguration. Now, Trump has warned during the campaign, he said those hostages better be back before they're going to be in big trouble. Now, we've always thought that there needed, we at JINSA here, my colleague Blaze and I and John Han, we always thought there need to be more pressure on Iran, more pressure on Qatar on the hostages, as opposed to just so much pressure on the Israelis, who obviously want the hostages back. But is there a way you think? I mean, they're not the Houthis, obviously, and you got these the Hamas soldiers, it's terrorists that are still alive. A lot of them in their tunnels. They're hard to reach. Sinwar was killed. Um, could there, you think, be something on the hostages now, before by January 20th, or
Look, we all hope so.
Yeah.
There's a command and control question.
yeah,
I don't know the answer.
yeah,
Who is negotiating for Hamas? I guess Khalid Mashal now has to move.
yeah,
By the way, interesting question. Where does he
Where?
move?
yeah?
Where do
that's what
those
I'm
guys
asking.
go? But
Would Turkey take him, or would that be because it's a NATO ally and Erdogan would be a way to? Would that he doesn't want to? It might set off Trump for him to host.
My
well,
hope is Tehran, and I hope they have a choice guest house location ready and waiting for them.
Yeah. Right.
So there's a command and control issue on who can release the hostages. How much is Hamas? How much is Islamic Jihad? How much is now criminals?
Yeah.
I would think that I would hope that whatever's left of Hamas now in command in Gaza, perhaps Sinwar's brother, realizes it's only going to get worse. The Israelis are going to keep doing what they're doing, and maybe more with President Trump back. And so it's time to strike some kind of deal now. I can't say I'm hopeful about that. I think it's a possibility in the next weeks while the Biden administration is still in power.
Yeah. Gabe, let me turn to is there any well, the one last thing on Iran, and then I want to turn to normalization issue with the Saudis, which you also mentioned, Gabe. But on the nuclear issue, which we really didn't engage, I guess one question is I was talking to one senior retired general involved with us this morning, and he said, this is a great moment to really pressure the Iranians on, you have the Israelis have now defanged. They've essentially eliminated Hamas as a threat. Hezbollah is significantly degraded, but still, has potency. You have Trump, who, will return a tougher. It won't be the Biden administration anymore. Those good old days for the Iranians are going to be ending soon. So there's a moment also, it seems to me, to deal with the nuclear program in one way or another. I don't know how you see that, Gabe, and how you see the Trump administration. I mean, could you see President Trump using military force, or would it be really supporting Israel to do what it might need to do?
President Trump said repeatedly, and I believe that the very first words out of his mouth when he went to TV after he killed Soleimani is, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That's something he feels pretty strongly about. The question for me is also, where does Iran choose to poke the bear here? I think the public will have two really good options to see an update of where this is going. One is going to be in November. Sometime later this month, the IAEA will put an update to how much nuclear material Iran is enriching, and then we'll have another update in February. So just as we talked about with Hezbollah now mostly degraded, there's two opportunities. Does Iran choose to curtail its enrichment and choose a less provocative route, or are they going to increase and hope that they are gaining more leverage? If they go that latter route, they are very much inviting military action, more likely, I think, from Israel. But I don't think you're going to see this constraining of Israeli action from President Trump. I think he would be more than happy to see Israel take action at some point. Obviously, a diplomatic solution might be his preference, but he will not ask Israel to take a win. He will not ask Israel to wait until it is too late. I think his preference would be for appropriate early action if Iran refuses to cooperate. Now, Iran also has a trick up its sleeve on the diplomatic side. I expect in 2025, they will withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will make a big deal out of it. They will use that as a huge attempt to try to frighten Western media into saying, look at this is what the consequence of pressure is on Iran. The important thing to remember is that Iran has been out of compliance with its Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty obligations and its IAEA obligations and its JCPOA commitments for about 6 years, 5.5 to 6 years now.
Yeah, let me ask you, Elliot, on the same question. Let me just add two things on this question. So, by the way, I might just add, just as a organizational plug, we have a Iran nuclear tracker, and with many helpful charts and diagrams, and it'll be updated when the IEA issues this new data, as Gabe just mentioned. And I encourage everyone to be following that on our website and our emails. But look, President Trump said, I don't know if we call him, I guess, President-elect Trump now. President-elect Trump said last month, if I recall, when there was a question how Israel would retaliate against Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel on October 1st. And Biden explicitly said, like, no, pretty much no nuclear, don't hit the nuclear targets, don't hit the energy targets. And Trump said, why not nuclear targets? That'd be the first thing you do. I don't remember exactly the quote. That'd be the first thing, and then everything else you deal with after, but it focused on the nuclear. And I'm just curious how you see how he'll think about this, whether it be U.S. or Israel or helping Israel if Israel decides and so on there.
There are a lot of variables. One of them is Israeli capability. Even if you assume quite limited air defense on the part of Iran, what can the Israelis do? From the air, or for that matter, from the ground, where they've been able to accomplish various things over time, like stealing the archive of the Iranian nuclear program. And how would the Iranians react to that? I actually can argue it all these different ways. That is, I think we all see the reason for Israel's taking out air defenses first, so as to enable second, third, fourth occasions when they may be hitting Iranian sites. Then there were all those their military targets, economic targets, political targets. It's hard to see if there is an exchange a second time and a third time and a fourth time. It's hard to see the Israelis treating the nuclear sites as kind of sacrosanct, as the absolute last thing you would hit, because none of the rest is existential for them. That is, and that changes the Middle East and has an enormous impact on other American allies in the region, and on us. We've maintained the pretty well the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Yes, other countries, North Korea, India, Pakistan, have joined it over time. But this would be more destabilizing for the region and the world. And it's obvious, I think, that other countries in the region would seek to follow Iran. In that sense, this would be a stabilizing, not a destabilizing event. Now, would the United States get drawn in? Again, we were asking ourselves, what is in the mind of Ayatollah Khamenei? To seek to bring the United States in is suicidal. If you go up the ladder of escalation, Iran loses more and more. So the notion that an Israeli strike on the Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities creates World War III or draws America into a major war in the Middle East has always seemed to me not only not proven, but really quite remote. And I think you will see, I think, in the Trump administration, a much tougher attitude toward the Iranian nuclear program, and a view that actually stability and the avoidance of confrontation is not the highest goal. The highest goal is to vindicate and advance American security interests, and they're not always the same.
Let me, by the way, my hope we may add is if the Biden administration does not resume arms shipments to Israel, that it would need not just for the war, but any military activities it might need to conduct in the region. Before it ends, I would hope that the Trump administration, I would expect that they would resume some of those arms shipments and move things through the system more quickly, and to replenish Israeli supplies. Let me turn to normalization. Gabe mentioned, I'm going to still start with you, Elliot, and I'll turn to Gabe. But one of the there were a number of positive developments going on in the region before October 7th last year.
Yeah.
One of them, of course, was Saudi Arabia, normalization with Saudi Arabia. I guess there are a couple questions now. Some people thought maybe, there was a hope if there wasn't October 7th, there were a lot of things obviously good that would happen. One of them would have been, it could have been normalization by the end of last year, maybe, the way things were moving. But if things are where you are now, you have one of the components of normalization between Israel and the Saudis was understood to be a U.S. Saudi mutual defense treaty. Do you think, but there have been reports that maybe the Biden administration might want to arrange some arrangement with the Saudis. It might be some security arrangement, be short of it. I guess just to step back for a second. How do you think this is going to play out? If you're the Saudis, do you want to wait for Trump to come in to do anything? Do you think that there might be some in the next couple of months before January 20th? Then, as Gabe mentioned, that Trump, you would think, would make a big push to extend what he started with the Abraham Accords to anyway, how do you see this all playing out?
I've always thought that the defense treaty was going to be hard. Using the word treaty, that means 67 votes. And as you know, Senator Lindsey Graham has argued for a long time, Joe Biden should try to do it.
Yeah.
Because the Democrats then will vote for it who might oppose it if it were done by a Republican administration. That's still true, I think. I think it's going to be hard to get to 67 votes. Thus the idea of lesser agreements, which I think is a sensible idea. The Saudis want, at best, a nuclear agreement that allows them to do some enrichment, a defense treaty in exchange for their, in a sense, normalization with Israel. I think that's going to be very tough to get. I think for reasons that I actually can't quite explain. I have a theory, but the Saudis have toughened their line on Palestinian statehood a lot. If you go back even a year or two under President Biden, you would see the Saudis having a fairly kind of amorphous sense publicly of what they need. Now you've had very strong statements about Palestinian statehood. Why? Again, I'm not sure. My guess is because the public reaction to the Gaza war, everybody watching Al Jazeera, has been very strong. And this is a kind of defensive move on the part of the government, on the part of the Crown Prince. I think that makes it quite tough. They're going to really have to back off some, because even the left in Israel is not now contemplating a deal that involves Palestinian statehood. And I think if you start thinking about what does it even mean, the PA is completely incompetent. The Palestinian people reject the PA. Gaza is a mess and has no government whatsoever. So to think about establishing a very weak, as it would be, a very weak Palestinian state is to open another door for Iran. And every Israeli official I've spoken to in the last couple of months, everyone has pointed to the increased Iranian efforts to destabilize Jordan and to get more weapons in through Syria and Jordan to the West Bank and Israel. So in that circumstance, creating a Palestinian state seems to be a non-starter in Israel. So I think the most the Biden administration can hope for is some smaller defense agreements that, at least suggest warm relations and progress. Then comes the Trump administration. And I think one of the first things a Trump Secretary of State or National Security Advisor has to say to the crown prince is, where are you really on this Palestinian statehood question? Because it's a non-starter. So what are we going to do?
You mean, just to clarify, you mean even a speech by Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, about a pathway that there's a lot of conditions that farther away, even
Yeah.
that you think is not really realistic?
I think it's very tough. I mean, Netanyahu has made such a speech in 1995, I
Bar-Ilan.
think. I mean,
Bar-Ilan speech, was that
yes,
one?
exactly. Yeah, but if you make a speech that will be politically not harmful to Netanyahu with his base, it will be a speech that I think has to say that, yes, there can be a Palestinian state. Of course, none of our grandchildren will live to see it.
Yeah.
But is that acceptable? I mean, that's my question, really.
Yeah.
What,
You know,
now that not under American pressure, because the Saudis have been under American pressure. When the Biden administration came in, the Biden administration was much more forceful in promoting a Palestinian state than the Saudis were. So the question really is, okay, with the cameras turned off, where are you now? That's the question for MBS.
Okay, no, it's an excellent point. Gabe, how do you, if you like to address this, how do you think President-elect Trump would approach?
Well, Elliott did a very good job of outlaying how difficult
That's
this
why I
is
asked
going
him
to
first.
be.
That's why I asked him first.
It will be difficult. I think there's a couple silver linings I see. One is a Saudi belief, which I've heard expressed, that the question of normalization is one of when, not if, at this point. There is a desire for Saudi Arabia to become one of, maybe not a Western nation, but a modern, again, I hate to use the word progressive, but a modern state in the community of the West. And the pathway to that is through normalization with Israel. That will signify to the international community that it's a new deal. I take solace from a couple things. One, we would only need 14, assuming all Republican senators would vote for a treaty. You would need 14 Democrat senators. I think there's a view in the region now that the only path to having a rebuilding of Gaza, to having any sense of future for the Palestinian people, lies through this deal. And that if you truly care about the Palestinian people, you want to get to an agreement so that other nations can now come work to rebuild the Palestinian state, rebuild institutions. There's a lot of interest from all parties involved in having the Saudis and Emiratis come in and have a moderate, thoughtful education system, de-radicalize Gaza. And then for Israel, the question is what security guarantees will be necessary and sufficient to get the Israeli body politic to accept a deal. I think the security concessions that would be necessary are very, very advanced, given the political sensitivities of granting a Palestinian state as almost something that could be perceived as a reward for October 7th. That's going to be very difficult to overcome. And I think the question for Senate Democrats will be, yes, we understand that you don't like President Trump, you don't like Prime Minister Netanyahu, and you don't like MBS. But there's 4 years from now. Are you going to be an obstacle on this, or are you going to say, look, we cannot have this be a partisan divide of who gets the credit? When there's an opportunity for peace in the Middle East, you need to take it. And so I have youthful naivete, perhaps, that there's a prospect there where you could see, look, there's two paths here. There's one of brokenness and the status quo, and the situation for Palestinians deteriorating further, or we can make difficult decisions politically, grant some of the people we don't like political wins, and move forward. So that's a question I think for a lot of politicians is we now have a 4-year window. Are we going to squander that 4-year window and try to get to something else, or are we going to say let's try to get to a solution soon? I think we're going to have the same leaders, and they're going to have to make that decision sooner rather than later.
Well, Elliot, if that's true, then if Gabe is correct, then do you think that MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi, would say, I'm going to hold off doing anything really on security with the Biden administration even interim, I'll roll the dice to some with the Trump administration? Or do you think they'll say, as Gabe pointed out, I mean, a lot of the Democrats, particularly the progressives, they don't like the Saudis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, frankly, a lot of this will be resolved behind the scenes. That is, if there's a decent partial agreement being discussed between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, it'd be in the interest of both parties to sign. I think the Saudis will get in touch with President Trump and they'll say, this looks good to us. Is there any reason not to go ahead with it? And, just resolve it quite informally.
Yeah.
It violates the one president at a time principle. But I think realistically, that's probably what happens.
Yeah. Let me ask you on another thing. It's related to Iran and the Middle East, but obviously affects Europe. So one of the issues President Trump is going to have to deal with on the foreign front is the Ukraine war. Now, we focus on the Mideast here, but I guess I want to talk about the Mideast element of that. So one of the things that we've all seen, of course, with the Ukraine war is how close the Russians, the Iranians have become in terms of supplying the Iranians supplying drones, building drones that the Russians use.
Yeah.
We don't know what exactly maybe the Russians are doing for the Iranians and everything. Are they helping on the nuclear side? But I guess, do you think as part of, I'll start with you, Elliot, as part of the President Trump's approach to trying to end the Ukraine war, I can't remember what the timeline was that he said, but he'd do it really quickly, that there might be an Iranian component to that arrangement? Would it just be about Ukraine and Russia, or would they also say, look, we're going to settle this, but I need you, President Putin, I need you to do someone for me on Iran. You got to stop what you've been doing or things like that. Or how do you see that playing out?
You should have started with Gabe.
Okay. Okay.
That I don't know. I think, the president, there are varying and sometimes opposing forces and opinions here. President Trump has said he wants that war over fast, but he doesn't want to be a loser.
Yeah.
He doesn't want something that looks like great victory for Putin. He doesn't want the kinds of scenes that Joe Biden had to live with from Kabul. He doesn't want to create anything like that in Ukraine. And he's going to hear, I think, from some potential appointees who have been to Kiev this year, and even in the last 3-4 months. You can't sell out the Ukrainians. You got to support the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are on our side. At one point, President Trump said, if the Russians didn't agree to negotiate in good faith, he would immensely increase the amount of arms going to Ukraine. I think that within the administration, there are going to be countervailing forces on this. And I think it's easy to make the prediction that, Trump will walk away from Ukraine. I don't actually think that's right. I think it's going to be a lot more complicated.
Gabe, do you have some?
There's a couple interesting things that I think will develop over the next few months. Well, once President Trump takes office, if there is a deal, a peace deal, will Western and G7 sanctions and penalties against Russian oil fall off? There's currently a G7 price cap. Currently, Russian oil trades at a $15-ish discount. If that is no longer on the table, how does that affect Iran? How does that affect global market supplies? There are a lot of interactions here. On the European side, President Trump or Secretary Pompeo had his 12 points, 12 conditions for Iran. Included 3 of those points were ending military support for Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis. Will the Europeans be the ones that now add a condition to any agreement that says any deal with Iran must include their cessation of military support for Russia? Would the Trump administration do the same? This actually makes the deal, any future deal with Iran, more difficult because we are adding things to the plate. And so I think that could also get solved a little bit and made a little bit more easy if that military conflict has now been solved. That being said, I think everyone that I'm speaking with views the Russian-Iranian alliance as fairly inseparable at this point. There are always would-be Kissingers who believe that we can split Russia and China apart as he did. That view, I think, is probably oversimplified and wishful thinking, and that applies both for the Russia-China relationship as well as the Russia-Iran relationship. On the China-Iran relationship, I actually think there might be something to it in the sense that we overestimate what Iran brings to the table for Beijing. Iran is only the sixth largest oil supplier to China. They don't get a lot from Iran other than the ability to create strategic conundrums for the United States. Now, that is a very beneficial relationship that Beijing earns. I don't think Russia and China necessarily want to solve the US Arab Iranian disputes. I think they benefit enormously from this tension, and they could be spoilers in any future agreement as well, especially if they're still in a war situation.
Let me, we only have 3 minutes left, or 3 or 4 minutes left. I'm going to ask Elliott to go a little off topic because what we saw online last night on Twitter and what we've read about it, what happened in Amsterdam with this, what some people are calling a pogrom against these Israelis that came to Amsterdam to watch the soccer match there. And it seemed like, Muslims from, I don't know where, maybe it's in Morocco, maybe from different places in the Middle East. We're going after Israelis, we're going after Jews. And the police didn't react quickly, although the king of the king apologized to President Herzog of Israel. We didn't do anything in World War II. We let the Jews down, and now we've let them down again. But I mean, it's pretty shocking to watch. And I guess, what does it tell you about Europe? And is there anything you think that the U.S. should be doing in this situation?
Well, it was shocking.
Yeah.
It underlines the precariousness of the situation of Jewish communities in much of Europe. People generally talk about France, but
Yeah.
this is the Netherlands where this kind of thing had not happened. I think it underlines one of the key issues that elected Donald Trump: immigration.
Yeah.
This was apparently a Muslim and Arab group or series of groups that did the attacks. And the anti-immigration leaders in the Netherlands have, of course, immediately spoken out. This is a problem that exists now all over Europe in a way that it doesn't exist in the United States. But the question of open borders and what is locally viewed as too much migration is now a major issue in politics in England, in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Sweden, obviously in Germany, in Italy, in Canada, and now in the United States. And it had a lot to do with our election as well.
Yeah. I had one Israeli general write text me, says, Europe is finished. I mean, it's not a new thought. I think a number of Jews have felt that way for a long time, actually, in Europe. But this was really striking to watch. And anyway,
not only I know we're out of time here, but
please.
Police reaction seemed to be poor. And that's another question that the Dutch are going to have to ask themselves. Why were there not police all over the place? And why was the reaction not quicker?
And there was a press report, I guess I had missed the article when it came out about a month ago, that the Dutch police said they don't want to protect, or they have ambivalence about protecting Jewish sites. I think
there were individuals in the police force who said that. Again, I mean, this is going to be a problem throughout Europe, because it cannot be the case that only in the Dutch police do you see such attitudes. It must be true throughout other parts of Europe as well. And I mean, I don't exactly share that general's view, but I do think many European Jews will watch something like this and wonder if there is a future for their children in Europe.
I don't know, but you wonder here for President Trump to think about, as people tweeted, all those pro-Hamas demonstrators in these different campuses here in the United States. They talk about globalizing the Intifada. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And if I wouldn't, he condemned those protests here, and you got to think they certainly don't want to see that here in the United States, to say the least. So
this is one thing that you will presumably see in a Trump administration, a much greater effort through law enforcement agencies and conceivably the Department of Education.
Yeah.
To prevent this kind of thing from happening on American streets and campuses.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end, and I'll just say as a teaser, we're going to be having Elliott back in a couple of weeks to talk about your new book. That actually talks about the future of American Jewry. And
this gives people an opportunity to go out and buy it quickly.
That's true. I've already done it, and Amazon delivered it right away, and at a discounted price, I may add. So I encourage everyone to read it. I'm in the middle of it, but by the time we do this, I'm going to be finished with that book.
Very good.
Elliott, it's great to have you. Gabe, thank you also so much. We appreciate everyone taking the time here on Friday afternoon, and obviously, please look out. I would add also, for those on, please look out for what we put out on the Iran issue, on U.S.-Israel security policy. Every week we have a webinar on the war with 2 or 3 of retired Israeli IDF generals that are involved with us, General Ice, General Ami George, General Norkin. Please always sign up for that. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Gabe.
Thank you.